welcome back from the ad break. You are still watching Prime Live. Now, my next guest is Brendon Petersen, who is a tech expert, and he's here to shed light into the critical digital transformation happening in South Africa. Now, today we are going to be diving into the digitization of Home Affairs services and the ways it's shaping the way citizens interact with government. Thank you so much for joining us, Brendon, and welcome to Prime Live.
Always great to be here.
Thank you so much. Now, can you please tell us more about the current digitization initiatives of the South African Department of Home Affairs?
Yeah, so DHA, the Department of Home Affairs, is looking to embark on what I think is a very, very ambitious digitization journey, where they modernize, how we as South Africans are able to access essential identity and travel documents. So obviously looking at ID and passport. I think the most notable initiative is the rollout of a digital visa application system for foreigners, which is going to use facial biometrics or selfie tech to verify identities. And this is going to be the first fully online visa process. They're also, as I said earlier, working on launching digital versions of smart ID cards and passports. So this will allow us as citizens to be able to apply, verify, check, our document applications, all online and digitally.
And what has already been implemented and what's still in the pipeline?
Well, there's a lot that still needs to be done. Unfortunately, I think we all know, the thing with Home Affairs when you go for a passport ID or anything else, there's the infamous system offline, which I've experienced myself many times. But what the department has done is they've already digitized, approximately over 90% of, its birth, marriage, and death records. There's an e-government platform or e-home affairs platform where you can do online bookings for ID and passport applications, as we know with banks, and you can also, now do bookings directly at certain home affairs just for certain time slots. And then obviously there's the e-visa system, which is using facial biometric verification. In the pipeline, obviously, it's the digital smart ID and passport systems, which they're looking at potentially rolling out next year. And then also there's a new automated self-service portal that's going to allow us as South Africans to update personal information, retrieve documentation without having to visit Home Affairs offices, and then expanding biometric systems to be able to include voice and iris recognition. Iris recognition is a feature that we saw on some Samsung flagship phones a couple of years ago, and then just sort of further integration with other departments to get a proper unified system across the board when it comes to government systems.
And in terms of the challenges, what are challenges that you are predicting with this digitization of, Home Affairs services?
Unfortunately, so many. I've been on radio and TV talking about all the different systems that are used across different government offices, how they don't speak to each other. And as I said just a few minutes ago, that thing we all know so well with Home Affairs, our system offline. We've gotten used to it, but it is a problem, especially if you're looking to digitize things. You can't have a system going offline, two, three, four, five, six times a day. So it's those sort of things. It's infrastructure, it's cybersecurity. South Africa is actually, for Africa, is ranked as the highest cybersecurity sort of risk in terms of cybersecurity attacks. So it's cybersecurity, we've got infrastructure inequality. Let's be honest, I don't think the public trusts, especially Home Affairs, that much. We've got a digital literacy problem. And then just, too much red tape, too many bottlenecks when it comes to procurement, not enough procedural things being done to sort of make sure things are going to the right people. And just, I think, a lot of inertia when it comes to bureaucracy.
And let's talk about, in terms of the challenges that you have mentioned, what suggestions do you have when it comes to these challenges on how they can be resolved?
I think it was just a few weeks ago we were talking about Starlink and those low Earth orbit satellites and last mile connectivity. That is something that needs to be sorted out. Maybe not with a Starlink, but we do need to invest in last mile connectivity. There's a lot of people in this country, who still don't have any form of internet access. So how do you digitize things and you've still got a significant portion of your population not having access to any digital services? So we've got to sort that out. There's obviously a trust issue. when it comes to, I think, especially home affairs and various parts of government with the public. So that's got to be dealt with. And then there's, as I said, there's a digital literacy sort of problem that we have. So we've got to upskill people. We've got to educate people in terms of, what are valid platforms? How do you do these certain things? I've heard from so many companies where they upskill people, and it's, things as simple as how do you log onto the internet? How do you create an email account? How do you log into that email? So we've got a lot of work to do there. And I think also if you look at, public private partnerships, obviously government hasn't been able to do all of these things. We've got a lot of great tech companies in this country who do have skills in these various areas. Maybe that is an avenue that they need to pursue as well.
Hmm. Most definitely. And how do you see this digitization transforming the way citizens interact with the government in South Africa in the long term?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I don't think anyone sort of really knows what the full-on impact is going to be. I
Mm.
do know that our Minister of Home Affairs was recently in Estonia for an e-government forum. So not just him, but other members of different governments from around the world. So clearly there's been a lot of talks there because Estonia has digitized a lot of what they do. But really, I think if you think about it, it does have the potential to sort of fundamentally shift that sort of relationship between government and citizens. Instead of standing in long queues, I mean, I remember when I went for my new passport almost a year ago,
Mm.
it was one of those days where, it was raining. I didn't have a choice. You had to stand in the line. You finally get further forward, and they're like, no, sorry, system is down. And we joke about it, but it's frustrating. It makes you not want to be there. People have traveled for hours to get there, 6 o'clock in the morning, and they leave there later in the day, still not having gotten what they needed sorted out, so they have to come back. So just being able to digitize that and make that whole thing sort of easier for people, I think already improves that sort of aspect of the relationship because now it's not the sort of running joke of, oh, this is where you're going to spend what feels like the rest of your life, just trying to get simple things sorted out. I think it could also bring, about a government that's hopefully more responsive, or at least a department that's hopefully more responsive and data driven, giving people the services that they actually need instead of what government thinks we need, so real time data could actually help tailor services in different areas because maybe one area needs more services for ID cards, maybe another one needs more for passports, maybe one needs more for birth certificates, so all of that sort of real-time data could help tailor those things. I think in the long term it could actually make things a lot more streamlined, hopefully reduce corruption, improve efficiency, but we'll have to see.
Mm. Now let's talk about the challenges that can actually come from this, especially for South African citizens that are based in rural areas. Let's talk about data, but also not even that. Not everybody in South Africa is tech savvy. Do you see this also? I mean, affecting those citizens?
Oh yeah, we're living in a world where everything is digital, even just the way we're doing this conversation. you know so it is going to impact everybody. It's a case of whether you want to or not, the world is digital, and one way or another we've got to learn to adapt to that, and at the very least learn the basic things to help us get through day to day in this digital world. And I think a massive rollout needs to be done in terms of these digital services because as I said, we've been speaking over the past couple of weeks about last mile connectivity. And imagine you living in an area where you've never had cell service. Now all of a sudden there's cell service. You get a phone and you have access to all of these platforms: education, entertainment, all of these things. Even a doctor. How do you learn how to navigate that? It's a lot of new technology to throw at people who've never experienced it. So we've got a lot of education to do in that space, but it is definitely going to impact them, one way or the other. I think if you look at AI, for example, it's a
Mm.
good example of how, whether we want to accept it or not, technology is coming, it is rewriting the way things are done. And companies are just sort of revamping the way they're doing things. And it is ultimately going to affect every single person,
Mm.
in this country.
Mm. And in terms of opportunities, obviously, if the government wants to digitize the home affairs, it means that there is also a collaboration opportunities that can come from, private sectors. Let's talk more about this. Do you see this growing, these private sectors?
Oh, absolutely. I think there's a lot of expertise, in South Africa from these companies. I think if you look at just sort of upskilling people when it comes to skills development. We've seen companies like Amazon Web Services, we've seen companies like Cisco, roll out training centers, education centers, where they can teach people these skills and actually help them find jobs. And that's obviously done in collaboration with government. So I think we've got some of the foundations for that in the country. I think now it's just an expansion of those sort of initiatives, finding the right partner who can, either educate people at government in terms of what technologies need to be used, or, building out that sort of technology pipeline. So I think there's definitely a lot that can be done. We spoke about cybersecurity being a massive concern in South Africa. These companies are international companies at the forefront of things like that. So, there's that. Banks and telecoms, a lot of the banking services have become digital now. You do everything from the app on your phone. So I think that also gives an opportunity. And we've, obviously got the existing services where you can go in certain provinces, get your ID or passport through one of the banks. And I think it also gives a lot of opportunities for startups. Identity verification, digital wallets, because that's where we're going to have to store these things, and remote service delivery. So I think it's a lot of that, and then obviously, education and NGOs will be able to support a lot of this when it comes to digital literacy. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, and I think that could potentially also bring more jobs, for people in the country.
Mm. Most definitely. And just lastly, before I let you go, what do you envision in terms of the future of South Africa if we ever decide to digitize, the government services, especially in the Home Affairs? Do you foresee a government or a Home Affairs that's running paperless, or do you think the whole we offline come back tomorrow issue is still going to be there even after they digitize everything?
I mean, I hope it's not going to be there, but that again comes down to infrastructure, because it's going to have to be a lot of infrastructure revamping. But I mean, I think the future, if you look at, what's happening in countries like Estonia, if you look at certain parts of the US, for example, where, Apple has started rolling out digital ID. So you can put your ID in your Apple wallet on your iPhone, and that is considered, valid by the US government in certain parts of the US. I think there is definite sort of pre-existing infrastructure or sort of blueprints for government, local, well, South African government to follow. But really, whether this is going to work does depend on, government actually following through, sustained political will. We need funding. They need to execute this properly, because we've heard a lot from government in the past about all these things they want to do, and then, they sort of just fizzle out. So you need sustained political will. And whether we can have a paperless home affairs, it is entirely possible. But that whole legacy of the offline, this offline system, it's not going to disappear overnight. I think even if it doesn't ever happen again, people will still be suspicious, and I think understandably so. So we need to have a strong digital backend, and a really good front end user experience.
Mm.
So reliable infrastructure, staff actually know what they're doing, and disaster recovery protocols, because unfortunately these things do happen. So if the system does go down, what do they do to bring it back up? What do they do to make sure that your application isn't lost, in the ether on the internet? So I think it is entirely possible, but it really is getting the right minds, getting a solid infrastructure, and following through with what they're trying to do.
Hmm. I mean, Brendon, thank you so much for joining us and just for shedding some light into this topic that we're speaking about tonight of digitization of the South African Home Office. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Viewers at home, that was Brendon Petersen, our tech expert, who was just shedding light on, what's happening in terms of the new implementation of, the digitization of, technology in terms of our home affairs services, and I hope that inshallah this will be a resolve in terms of all the services that we are always complaining about, so this will be accessible for everybody to use. But without wasting any time, let's go to an ad break. We'll see you right after this.